Welcome to Talking Tuesday. I am your host, Fancy Quan, and today we're going to talk about what I wish my managers knew about me. So this isn't necessarily a specific manager. This isn't necessarily a specific industry. In general, I just feel like this is a very broad kind of understanding of perhaps maybe how managers could be better managers. Also myself, right, reflecting back and thinking like these are things I need to improve as well as a manager. So I've been past and present. But let's just dive on in here quickly. There's only 4 of these topics. Maybe I'll make a whole series of these in the long run. But I just want to cover kind of the core basics here of what I wish my managers knew about me. So the first one's going to be what other people thought of me. So often I find that managers are kind of in their own little worlds and they see an employee through their own lens, their own perspective a lot of times. And they don't realize a lot of times that employees, so different employees, have all these relationships, complex relationships outside of, right, the ones that your manager sees or you see as a manager. So a lot of times I could actually leverage people across an industry, in a bank, or in a community, or in a specific situation. And I've built really strong relationships across different departments. And so often my managers realize like, oh, I know that you know this person in this department and you know this person in this department. And they just leave it at that as if like you only know 2 people and that's just how it is. But I wish they would actually take the time to really realize there are people in other positions. So for example, it's really frustrating to me. I get job offers at multiple banks I've been at. I consistently get job offers internally. So different departments try to poach me to come work on their teams. So I've been poached to go into an economics department. I've been poached to go into a variety of business units. So the business itself, I've been offered jobs in research and other analytics teams, as well as model development teams. And I'm not a broadcasty person. Like I don't jump up and, email everybody or tell everybody at work like, hey, I got a job offer from this department because they think I'm so good, right? And there are people that do this and they brag about it and think it's a big deal. But I just wish the managers would take the time to really kind of figure out the depth of the relationships. Realize you probably have contacts and support across both your company that you're at as well as the industry. And I think a lot of managers also miss that point that if you're often, so I think I'm overlooked a lot in the companies I work at. And yet when I, am about my daily business, I have people that email me and say, hey, Dimitri, what's going on? I'm from, this other company. I need this perspective. I need this feedback. I'm trying to figure out X, Y, and Z, and you're an expert in this area. Could you help me, solve this, or could you help me talk about it? Of course, I know there's boundaries on proprietary. So even when I worked, for example, in the restroom business, which is this whole podcast, I didn't go out and tell competitors, oh, you should do this, that, and the other. But I think across industries, right, it's important to realize your employees a lot of times are a lot more important to other corporations, or a lot more valuable than you actually give them. And so a lot of times I feel like my perspectives just aren't heard. So again, I understand these other departments. Why? Because I go and I talk to them and I say, hey, X, Y, and Z, what's going on with this, that, and the other? And then they say, oh, Dimitri, like we're friends, right? So we're having this behind closed doors conversation about this person screwed this up and this is going on. And, these politics are playing into this and we can't figure out how to get around it. And a lot of times I try to figure out how can I help if possible. Maybe I know somebody else in a different department that can help leverage those situations. But again, I just wish managers knew like there were other relationships and dynamics playing. And a lot of times you think you're a big shot in your high mighty positions, but you're going to miss those kind of subtle relationships. And even like when I worked so specifically here in the manufacturing side, I had really interesting relationships with the employees themselves that were actually doing the work. So again, my relationships and like our president's relationships with them were different, and we had different relationships with different people. So it was always nice when we would compare, because we would sit down and try to figure out what's going on realistically behind the scenes, because you have all these different perspectives of all these different employees, and trying to kind of tear these things apart is kind of important. So again, I wish managers knew what other people thought of me and realized there are these dynamic relationships kind of going across the industry, across firms, for example, and actually leverage that and try to utilize those components. The second thing here is going to be my experience is a lot deeper than you actually know. So I worked with a couple of these. We brought in this guy that was a PhD guru and everyone thought they were a god. And I've had this happen at multiple firms, so no, this isn't a specific person or specific company. And they've brought in these individuals and everybody worships them as being this really, really smart and great person. And the reason for all of this a lot of times is that they beat their chest and they stand up and say, I'm an expert, I know everything. And often these people are basically hacks and frauds. It's just how it ends up happening. I'm really shy on top of that, so I don't like to go out and say like, oh, I know this, that, and the other, and I'm smarter than the rest of you. And yes, it does come across that I'm like that occasionally, but a lot of people I've worked with, a lot of my colleagues, managers, everything, they will tell you in the past, like, I didn't know Dimitri knew X, Y, and Z, and then like he was able to do this. So I've had a company that didn't know I knew operational risk, for example. They had this massive project for operational risk. They brought me and said, hey, can you kind of work on this? And then I started going through it and just laid out this entire report explaining all the things we needed to work on, what we needed to look at. And then I laid out all the issues they were having. And they were just like blown away. They couldn't believe, like, well, how do you know all this? It's like, well, I've studied this. I've worked with the operations. Going back to that first point, right? I worked with the operations departments at multiple banks and multiple firms. And so I've had a lot of expertise in these areas, modeling and well as the business side on this, right? So I don't know. There's a lot of this deeper knowledge that people just don't really understand. And I think as a manager, you could really utilize your employees if you actually extract their expertise better. And again, trying to talk to them, trying to understand it. Don't have like a 10-minute conversation on just give me a list of your expertise, right? Try to dig deeper on this. I think that's an important piece here. And I think this podcast season as a whole has kind of highlighted this a little bit, right? I've just scratched on the surface, kind of showing a little few points here and there, trying to make content that's exciting and somewhat interesting to a variety of people. But again, I've worked in all these different areas of dealing with like HR and IRS and taxes and accounting and finance and corporate finance and investor relations and right doing operations management, for example, and doing this optimization and working in marketing and analytics and all this. I have this really broad experience base that I can bring, but often right managers don't even consider you, don't even open these conversations because of that. And then the third one here is going to be my technical ability. So again, the second one is going to be just my experiences are very wide. They're a lot deeper in all these different random areas than people expect. The third one's going to be my technical skills, though. So again, everybody views me as a quant, and they always view you as specialized in one thing. So when I worked at my first job, right, I was in PP&R. That's all I knew. That's all I did. But at that company specifically, right, it was amazing because I was able to take on all these extra projects and kind of spread myself into a bunch of different things. But a lot of times people bucket me, and like right now I'm working in credit risk, for example. And in past firms, like I mentioned, I worked in operational risk on a project and blew people away, and they just didn't understand what's going on. But a lot of times people just kind of bucket you as a quant that, oh, you're a quant, and like you're a banking quant, or you're an investment quant, or you're a market risk quant, or an operations risk quant. Like they try to nail you down into like one bucket. And I think it makes sense for a lot of employees because a lot of employees only worked in one bank in one area, so they're specialized in one very specific thing. But that being said, my technical abilities go very, very deep and are very, very broad. So on top of just that expertise in business in general, so which is point number 2. Point number 3 is just really the technical aspects. And I've had colleagues that have really gotten to know me over the years. So again, I'm not the guy jumping out, yelling and screaming. I'm a genius here. I'm just working with these people over the years, helping out, trying to pitch in, trying to be a team player. And a lot of these colleagues end up kind of coming around saying, wow, Dimitri knows quite a bit about X, Y, and Z. One of the biggest compliments I've ever received is one of my colleagues mentioned, Dimitri has this weird ability to pick up like a topic or a concept or a model or something, and he can dive extremely deep, read all the academic papers, and know it inside and out and all the intricacies quickly, right? It's just a rare skill. A lot of people take a long, long time to do this, so it's hard to put people on new projects, but Dimitri, he is an expert on this. If we have any new kind of crazy things, we love to throw him on these projects. Again, it's taken me years to build these relationships with some of these people that have kind of realized this, but I think a lot of times management, both 1 step above you, 2 steps above you, 3 steps above you, they just don't get to know your employees. They don't get to know your assets, right? What you have to offer the corporation. And so again, I think quants a lot of times are unfairly technical, pigeonholed, and they don't realize they can easily do a variety of different areas because they have expertise a lot of times in a variety of these different areas. And then finally, the fourth point here is going to be knowing me on a personal level here. So I have a lot of experience in management and on the soft skill side. However, a lot of times it's just overlooked because of the quantiness, the technicalness. And often managers provide me advice, and I take it full-heartedly. Like I'm excited to learn from you, to see how you work, because I value your perspective and your experience, and the fact that a lot of times these managers have been in these corporations for a long, long time. You'll find that out. People in higher levels in banks and even in like manufacturing and other areas, a lot of times it's because they've been there for so long. So I do like to take your advice and try to figure out, okay, what is your perspective and think it through. But at the same time, I think they don't really get to know me on a personal level a lot of times and realize my background and experience, like my management styles, things. I've been managing probably far longer than you have as a manager. So again, I was managing at a very young age. For example, I say I was like 19. And people say, oh, that was a startup company. That's not worth anything. And, that was this other small problem. But they don't realize, I was managing at 19, people that were in high school with me, their parents. So I was managing people in their 40s, perhaps in their early 50s, believe so, around there. But in general, my managing expertise, I cover just a lot of scenarios you're just never going to be in. Right? You think that it's very dynamic, and I try to understand your perspective because you do have this unique perspective, as I pointed out with other bullet points here, right? Managing up and managing down is important. So, understanding your manager's perspective as well. But at the same time, I've just been in these really odd, weird situations where you're just never going to be in that, right? So, for example, here we've had I've fired employees who've become physically violent. So we didn't have all these plushy HR departments that would take them aside and go through the protocol and the processes, and there's really no face-to-face with the management, and you just provide a few words or whatever. No, I'm legitimately firing these people and getting rid of them because they failed and having to explain this to them as nicely as possible. But again, it's a tough situation. Another piece here is that we had an employee commit suicide. So he was a close friend of mine as well, so it kind of hit closer to home as well. Our president was really good friends with him as well. I think more like a father figure to him. He provided him really good advice. A guy that's a little off the rails. He'd done prison time before. Close friend though. We spent some good time together. I really miss working with him a lot. But again, how do you cope with that as a manager? How do you address that at work, right? Everyone's going to come in and be like, where is so-and-so? What's going on? Addressing these kind of touchy topics and also trying to separate your personal feelings and relationships from these. Again, these are just things you're not going to be able to fully have experience with. Again, managing large numbers of people, for example. So I manage 15 people at a time here, which again isn't huge. But for a lot of banks and all these other institutions and a lot of corporations, you typically start managing very small teams and then you slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger. But a lot of times in these big corporations, you might be managing 300 people, but you're really only managing 5, let's say directors, senior directors or something. And then those people are managing other people. So you're not even connected with all these people. But I was physically managing and responsible at one point up to 12 to 15 people. And then of course it went down to 6 or 8 people. But again, trying to manage the politics, the conflicts. Again, I've worked on both the white collar side and the blue collar side of the manufacturing industry. So I've managed those types of things. I just wish people would get to know you, or managers in general, would get to know you more personally. There's a lot of stories, backgrounds, different experiences people have that you just can't understand and can't experience. And I can definitely vouch for this. I've had employees I've worked with that have come from very interesting home lives. So understanding them, understanding how they tick, how they work. Again, it helps me work with them better because I understand this is normal for me, or this is what I think is normal for everybody. And yet you have these very unique and different situations where that's not how the real world works for these people who maybe come from other countries or even just other socioeconomic backgrounds in the United States, for example. And so I just wish, again, as a whole wrap up here on this final point of knowing me on a personal level, a lot of managers were too nervous or too scared to take me out to lunch or to just have a coffee and just chat on a personal level. And often I wish I could get to know you better on a personal level. And I've invited managers on, coffees before. And a lot of times I get turned down, right? It's just this weird thing, they view you as an employee and they're a manager. So therefore it's just kind of a weird thing. But when you're a manager, I think it is your responsibility to get to know your employees better on a personal level. Again, trying to work with the team, trying to kind of work everything together. These are kind of my 4 points. So they kind of have this same theme though, right? These are things I wish my manager knew about me. It's not a very specific event. I just wish managers in general across all industries and everything would take more time to really get to know their employees, their strengths, their weaknesses, right? I see this so often. An amazing employee will come into a corporation. They assign them jobs and tasks that don't fit their skill sets very well. There's no intention to really develop the employee either in these other areas, and then they end up letting them go or getting rid of them because they don't fit. Again, know your employees. It's a leverage. It's an asset for the corporation. It'll also make your job better as well, because then you can look better as a manager. Your team gets a lot more done. And also, just on a personal level, why not make friends, right? Build relationships with the people you're going to spend all this time with in general. But anyways, those are my tips, kind of my tricks here, my 4 things I wish managers knew about me, right? Across all industries, all perspectives, all levels of management as well. Anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you like this podcast or this YouTube video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, until next time.